big consideration. Probably that recommendation, while the report goes to the zoning board, at least I'm suggesting that that's the type of higher level recommendation that should be called out from these spreadsheets. And I can envision a couple paragraphs that speak to why a land use plan would be valuable to carry out the comprehensive plan. There's another that I think, even though the comprehensive plan calls for the town to develop an open space acquisition program, I think is the language that, and you've spoken about a fee in lieu in a couple policies. That there would be an additional recommendation that reinforces the comprehensive plan to proceed ahead and create an open space acquisition program with fee in lieu provisions. There may be one other of these additional, you'll see them eventually, but you've said over and over again there should be criteria for granting exceptions. Well, that's a simple phrase, but it should be in there. You've said reconcile the table numbers and the provisions. Careful editing in the redraft. That's just make sure you cover all that. But I think with what you've concluded tonight, I may have a draft by next week. Jesse and I want to make sure that it's a good-looking draft as a professional product. As I'm envisioning it, it will have draft stamp all over every single page, saying draft for discussion only, draft for committee consideration only. Now, our meeting is being televised, and anybody, I'm sure, will talk to any neighbor, but that draft is for you to look at, and I appreciate when I send it out, when we send it out, send me your feedback. I think it'd be good as we do the final editing before you're asked to make your final review of the final report. You may see things that I've phrased inappropriately, and it may even warrant some discussion on some of these more difficult topics.
So Bill, the one thing I would recommend too is that not only when we see that draft, we also get every single policy area spreadsheet. I know they're out in the Dropbox, or they can be. But I know we have one to finalize the draft next week, which is the one we just did, because we will want to see that and review it one last time, and then at the beginning of next meeting, say that it's good in draft form.
Yeah, there's a holding area to receive all of these recommendations, but in a good process, I think at our next meeting, you will begin your review of the recommendations and make I guess we'll call it a final recommendation, or approval of the recommendations for including in the final report.
I'm just going to send that. Carrie, the witness Carrie.
We are, Jesse and I are talking about putting it in the Dropbox tomorrow for policy areas 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We need to shrink 6 so that it fits the format that's shown here. And then we'll wait for your final approval of the policy area 5. There's the text right now. It's maybe it's about 7 or 8 pages, and then there would be the spreadsheets with that might run what, maybe 20 or 30 pages.
Essentially 2 sets, right?
Yes. When if I could bridge to the next meeting, when you begin your consideration of these recommendations. For sure, for efficiency, we don't want to go through them one by one. If, as you look at this, at your body of work, you see a recommendation that you want to bring up for discussion, let me know, and we will highlight it in some way.
Can that go out, the directions for the next meeting and how you want to proceed with these review, go out in an email? Because our meeting is on Tuesday, so we only have a few days.
I'll, yeah, I can probably say a little
Sorry,
bit
Wednesday.
about what
Sorry,
I'm
I'm looking at the
saying.
wrong week. It's
But-
Wednesday, so you also want to.
But what I'm suggesting is that the discussion of the recommendation package, that the discussion be only what you want to call out for discussion.
Yeah, we're not going to go line by line.
No, so it's going to take a little bit of work on your part to, you know, I really think we need a little bit more discussion there, or, and I don't want to confuse that issue, but I've seen going back through that in some of these recommendations, they're phrased, and only Carrie could probably understand what was said. And there may be a way of having them read more clearly. And depending on our time, I may bring, here's some suggested language that it still is consistent with the intent of your recommendation, but it might be a little bit cleaner. I remember an example. There was one where Jason said in a and it was captured in a recommendation, I may be the only one thinking about this. You know, it's something about trails. Well, you don't want that in the set of recommendations. And everybody knows Jason's thinking about trails. And there may be some others where there's a blend of an answer to a question with a recommendation. And I think that it's for editing, it's probably better having the recommendation just be the recommendation.
The other thing is, though, I think our lens, the way we see things might have changed now that we're toward the end of the process. So there might be things we catch in our early recommendations that either A, could be less significant or could be more significant now. So that's where I would challenge everyone, is to look them over now, because your breadth of knowledge is much bigger now than it was when we started. Yeah, we're all smarter. We're grabbing low-hanging fruit.
We're tired.
So, yeah, and we're tired. So I think the key there would be take that lens of, okay, now I'm kind of an expert on the comprehensive plan, and I'm not saying I am, we as a collective body are, and then see what we can do going forward. So the next meeting is Wednesday, April 18th, from 6 to 7:45 here, and we'll start the review of the recommendations. We will have an email that will come out for those two in the next, like tomorrow, or is that Monday? Can I hold you guys to the fire for tomorrow?
Well, we'll have the recommendations available tomorrow. I'll have one or two sentences saying, here's how I would like you to flag recommendations that you want to be sure to discuss at our next meeting.
And we have to start with the policy area that we just completed,
Yes.
though.
Yeah, the agenda, provisionally approved policy area 5. I think just in the flow of the meeting next week, I would recommend going policy area 1, 2, 3, 4, skip 5. Or maybe.
Put that in an email, I don't want to keep
Got
anyone
it,
much longer.
okay.
And then let's, any other comments from everyone before we have 2 public comments? No? Okay?
Pretty darn awesome accomplishment, really,
Almost.
We'll have to think of something, I don't know, I'll have to get with the administrative arm.
Okay, public comments, Jim?
So, the water debate, I was a lot like the comments that I heard tonight.
Jim,
Who's right,
could you
who's wrong.
introduce who you are, please?
So back in And that report originally, the water study, I think, was done in '97. It hit southeast on Tyrone Loop when people said, well, the smallest lot we can have in Guilford County is 2.34 acres. I was involved in that debate and watched what transpired. And then the same thing came to Summerfield. And we had these discussions in '99. And I brought with you a study, and I've got copies, I have about 15 copies. The first study is done by Ralph Heath, who was a hydrologist for North Carolina, trained Charles Daniel, Doug Harnett, and he did a water study for Summerfield. And you'll get a copy of that you can read. So my questions is more, and I'm a soil scientist, not a hydrologist, but I get to study some hydrology and some of the scientific principles that go on. I had questions, and so I wrote the U.S. Geological Survey and said, look, I think this study does not give weight to recharge that's coming from septic systems. Can you explain? And they wrote me back and didn't explain it all to my satisfaction, but some things that were pertinent that after I've mulled this over a long time, there's some statements in the letter that I was written by the U.S. Department of Interior, U.S. Geological Survey. And they talk about this report does not make any conclusions about what is appropriate for development in Guilford County, but rather provides examples of how to use interpretations in this report. So if I told you that my friend and I got in a car and flew to Greensboro, and then 20 years later somebody's examining that statement and said they had a car that could fly, and there'd be a big debate over whether that car flew or that car didn't fly. And I think, and Charles Daniel was a very well-respected hydrologist, but I think when he did that example, it was more to show the nuts and bolts about how you would calculate recharge and some of the principles that go into groundwater hydrology. I don't think his intent was to legislate, and it states throughout this response from USGS back to me that that report was not intended to legislate lot sizes. In fact, it says site-specific techniques can and should be used as the analysis is reduced from a regional scale to a local scale, such as a planned development. And I gave you a copy of that. Some other things that I have, if you're really interested in being educated about groundwater hydrology, Heath, there's basic groundwater hydrology. I didn't bring you all a copy of that. You can look at it, take a picture of it. You can pull it offline. And then there's another paper that was done under Heath's direction, groundwater recharge in North Carolina. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
David, you're up.
Most of what I was going to say after has already kind of been covered, and thank you, Priscilla, for your question. And so just some random comments. I think that you have a lot of resources available to you in this town, and if you wanted to take the time to learn some more about Oak Ridge Commons, Philip Cook would be glad to come and tell you everything about that.
He's a Summerfield resident.
And I would suggest if we have time to have a developer in, not me because I'm conflicted or whatever, or I'm sure we'll be conflicted out. There are people that spend a lot of time doing this that by default, if they've had a permit in Chatham County or Chapel Hill or wherever they're doing it, they've had to get a PhD in it by default, and they've paid a lot of money for the engineering, the science that we're talking about. I think that I've heard, on average, we spend a lot of time talking, and I think that with all due respect to everyone here in the room, the town council and the zoning board, to my knowledge, none of you have ever developed a subdivision. Some of you have built, I know Gary, you've developed, but I think you were on a sewer line when you did most of your development. So until you've done it, it's hard to know how many limiting factors that we have. I just know this. I know what our comp plan says, and I know that it's a good plan, and I don't agree with amending that plan because I know how much heart and soul went into it. Some of those that are advocating amending the plan were actually on the committee that wrote it. And so I think it's a good plan. I think that we should all be very careful about density. We should be careful about quality, moderately priced housing. careful and thoughtful about how we do all these things. But there's a national trend, like a tidal wave, that is away from the predominant housing that is the only housing that we can build in this community right now. And it's not gonna stop anytime soon. And I think the more careful and thoughtful we are about how we're going to provide for that to happen, we will change the aspects of our age and income discrimination. And we're discriminating by default with our policy. And you guys have done such a wonderful job. I think all the issues are on the table now. How you weld that together and what you recommend to the zoning board and the zoning board's ultimate action and the council's ultimate action. We have work to do. We have an ordinance to write. We have more money to spend. It's the number one most important thing that this town council does. We don't pick up trash. We don't do police. We don't do anything. We mow the grass. We empty the trash cans at the ball field. Good land use regulation will have more to do with how our town turns out than anything else that town council does. So I'm all for the work that you've done. I'm all for whatever I have to offer in terms of my knowledge, but I would highly recommend that you get input from those that have done it, and we'll come out with a great ordinance, and you'll see great development being done.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next
Motion to adjourn.
Wednesday. You have a second?
Second.
Harry did come home.